The truth is out there. Trust no one. I want to believe. These simple yet profound statements fill the minds of X-Files fans who call themselves X-Files, P-H-I-L-E-S, with images of UFOs, liver-eating stretchy mutants, vampires, fluke men, invisible elephants, and even a poop monster. The X-Files started on Fox, a relatively new network to the mainstream in 1993, with a small but loyal following, which eventually grew to be one of the greatest pop culture phenomenons of our day, with over 2 million viewers at its highest point. All X-Files episodes fall under one of two categories: mythology and monster of the week. Mythology episodes follow an overarching story about governmental and alien conspiracy, while Monster of the Week episodes are mostly standalone one-offs that focus on varied paranormal-related mysteries being investigated by agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully of the FBI. The most controversial and often considered most horrifying of these Monster of the Week episodes is called Home. It was so horrifying with its murder, incest, and infanticide that the episode was never allowed to be aired again on the Fox network due to so many complaints. The episode Home engages with the subject of hegemony in small towns and its resistance to opposition from larger and alternate hegemonies. Hegemony is defined by Antonio Gramsci as a complex interlocking of political, social, and cultural forces, or the active social and cultural forces which are its necessary elements. So hegemony is the shared cultural, ideological, and social beliefs that are seen as true to a society. In Home, Mulder and Scully are led to the idealistic town of Home, Pennsylvania, and the incestuous Peacock family on the edge of that town, which is determined to sustain the antiquated hegemony of the Confederate Civil War era by whatever means necessary. Home reveals that nostalgic hegemony is a force that is difficult to break down and gets stronger the longer it is believed to be true. Although this episode is infamous for its horrific images of murder, incest, and infanticide, its true monstrosity is that hegemony rooted in a nostalgic belief of the past is more dangerous than a new and informed hegemony and almost impossible to destroy. Agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully first appear in this episode to investigate a case revolving around a severely deformed newborn baby. Kids found the dead baby buried in a field while they were playing a sandlot-style baseball game in the town of Home, Pennsylvania. As Scully is hard at work looking at evidence and trying to talk to Mulder about the case, he is busy looking at the baseball left behind and reminiscing about his childhood with his sister. All-day pickup games out on the vineyard, riding bikes down to the beach, eating bologna sandwiches. He says, only place you had to be was on time for dinner. Never had to lock your doors, no modems, no faxes, no cell phones. He goes on to say, my work demands that I live in a big city, but if I had to settle down and build a home, be a place like this. These comments early in the episode establish the idea of what I call a nostalgic hegemony. While Mulder is remembering his youth, he is highlighting the parts that were pleasant, while forgetting what viewers of the show know about his childhood, which actually involved his sister getting abducted and experimented on, and traumatic involvements with a shadowy syndicate working within the government. He says that he wants to live in a small town like that, because the hegemony of this small town, as we see through the episode, is founded on nostalgia, a belief that things were better in the past, and that those antiquated beliefs should continue to be held on to. Although Mulder and Scully exist in and represent a modern hegemony, Mulder sees the appeal of living in nostalgia, while Scully tells him it would be like living in Mayberry, a reference to the Andy Griffith Show, which is famous for its nostalgic view of the 50s. The evidence that the town of Home exists in nostalgic hegemony is revealed with the introduction of a sheriff named Andy Taylor, another nod to the Andy Griffith Show. When describing the town of Home, he says, population of Home is only a few hundred. Everybody knows everybody, pretty much. This town is my home. I love it. It's quiet, peaceful. I don't even wear a gun. This living hegemony of Home is so idealistic that the police force doesn't feel the need to carry guns, which represents the depth of belief this town has in the nostalgic reality they collectively believe in. A dangerous part of this nostalgia lays in the fact that the past being idealized never exists the way it is being viewed. Taylor says to Mulder and Scully about the town, I've seen and heard some of the sick and horrible things that go on outside my home. At the same time, I knew we couldn't stay hidden forever. that one day the modern world would find us and my hometown would change forever. It's interesting that when he says this, he distinctly separates himself and home from the modern world. He sees modernity as sick and horrible, but has obviously benefited from some progress, since he is a black man working as a sheriff, a reality that would have been impossible a mere 40 years previous. The ideological framework for their hegemony is based on nostalgia for a past that never really existed. This creates the illusion that things have always been as they are now, because nostalgia ignores or covers up the ugly side of the past. The town of Home attempts to stay away from the ideology of the world, but feels the need to reach out to the government to help with this crime. When the case proves more difficult than they are used to dealing with, Sheriff Taylor reaches out to the FBI to exercise or attempt to exercise what Raymond Williams terms as rule, expressed in directly political forms and in times of crisis by direct or effective coercion. Sheriff Taylor says to Mulder and Scully about the case and the impact it may have on the town, "I want to find whoever did this, but in doing so, I'd like it if the way things are around here didn't have to change." What Sheriff Taylor, and by extension the town of Home, is trying to do is keep rule and order, but also live under the hegemony of the past. They struggle to sustain against ruling class ideology. They want assistance through the alternate hegemony of the FBI and modern world because of their different specialties and beliefs, but don't want those beliefs to permeate into their own system. The isolation of the Peacock family leads to their own self-sustaining nostalgic hegemony. The Peacock family, who lives on the edge in a farm on the outskirts of town near the site of the dead infant body, is introduced by Sheriff Taylor to Mulder and Scully by saying, "The Peacocks built that farm during the Civil War. It has no electricity, no running water, no heat. They grow their own food. They raise their own pigs. They breed their own cows. Raise and breed their own stock, if you get my meaning. Because they do not leave their home or family for anything, and I mean anything, the Peacock family represents an ostracized, past-bound hegemony that is sustained through a realized complex of experiences, relationships, and activities with specific pressures and limits. These limits are self-regulated, since the family controls every aspect of their lives and are not dependent on the town or government or anyone outside of the family as those who control the primary means of production. The fact that the family has been self-sustaining and propagating since the Civil War means that their hegemony is based on the values and beliefs of that time. And as evidenced by Mrs. Peacock's use of the term War of Northern Aggression, we know that the racial equality recognized by the nostalgia of the town does not match with the nostalgic hegemony of the Peacock family, which eventually leads to the murder of Sheriff Taylor and his wife when the Peacocks feel threatened by hegemonic infiltration. The Peacock family, Mulder and Scully, and the town of Home represent three opposing hegemonies. Theorist Raymond Williams speaks of alternate hegemonies that are always competing. Any hegemonic process must be especially alert and responsible to the alternatives in opposition which question or threaten its dominance. Up until this time, the community of Home does not question the hegemony that exists in the Peacock family, choosing rather to ignore the negative implications of the past made manifest within the beliefs and practices of the Peacocks. They leave them alone and don't have any problems with them. However, when they call in the opposing hegemony of the FBI, represented by Mulder and Scully, to investigate the Peacock family, representing a hegemony they have left alone, it brings all three opposing hegemonies together in a way that threatens the Peacocks and causes them to lash out against the threat of fixing them. Michel Foucault used the city under plague as a symbolic representation for how a power structure or system would inject their hegemony into the lives and homes of the people they are attempting to control. The plague model described by Foucault is when they would remove the family from the home infected or potentially infected by the plague, fill the home with perfume, light it on fire, cleansing the home of any plague that may have been there with their manufactured perfume, and return the family into their house. In an ideological and hegemonic way, the same thing is done in the homes of families in the hopes that the home will serve as magical spaces where people go to die in order that they may be reborn as modern individuals, enclosed and self-regulating. The hope is that if those in power can somehow ideologically infiltrate the home of the individuals they are trying to rule over, the occupants of that home will then self-regulate under a hegemonic system that they believe in and practice. When Mulder and Scully first enter the Peacock home, the Peacocks see it as a threat to change their way of life, like in the plague model. Mulder and Scully go into the Peacock home to investigate, thinking that there may be a kidnapped woman being kept there. At this point, they are unaware that the quadriplegic Mrs. Peacock being kept under the bed, the mother of the remaining sons, is actually choosing to live and propagate with her sons in order to maintain the family line and hegemony of their self-regulated home. The Peacocks refuse to have this happen to their home because it would threaten the hegemony that they cling to over anything else. They are willing to commit homicide, infanticide, trespassing, and incest in order to sustain and protect their home from being subject to a hegemonic cleansing. The murder of Sheriff Taylor and his wife is both a retaliatory attack and a re-emphasis of their hegemonic ideals. When theorist Raymond Williams talks about opposing and counter-hegemonies adapting and changing through their interplay, he also notes that the conditions of the counterculture or outlying hegemony can vary from extreme isolation to pre-revolutionary breakdowns to actual revolutionary activity. The episode begins with the Peacocks in extreme isolation existing on the outskirts of home. As the FBI's hegemony threatens to infiltrate, we see them move on to what Williams has termed here as revolutionary activity. Since it was Mulder and Scully who entered their house, but Sheriff Taylor who gets murdered, the attack is symbolically more than mere payback for entering their house. It is also a reminder and a resurfacing of the dangerous truth about the town and country's racist past. Scully's attempt to logically convince Mrs. Peacock of the dangerous implications of their nostalgic hegemony to themselves and to others is unsuccessful due to the depth of Mrs. Peacock's belief and investment in it. When Mulder and Scully enter the Peacock home for the final time, going toe-to-toe with them both physically and through dialogue, they discover the alarming truth that Mrs. Peacock is in fact the mother of the killed child, and she is being kept on a board under a bed, and that it is in no way against her will. Scully begins her attempt to logically explain their need to conform to modern ways by telling Mrs. Peacock that she is in need of medical attention, that she and Mulder are there to help, to which Mrs. Peacock responds, "This is our home. Why leave it?" When Scully asks about the physical pain she must be feeling, Mrs. Peacock tells her that pain just runs in their family. When she got in a car accident and her arm was torn off, she explains, "The boys took me home, sewed me up just like the family learnt in the War of Northern Aggression." The commitment the family has to sustaining their hegemony has been strong ever since the Civil War and reaches well past biological and scientific reasoning. If pain runs in the family, it is due to the biologically unsustainable result of generations of incest. Yet they would rather feel the pain than give up their way of life. When Scully tries to reason with her by explaining the laws her sons have broken by murdering people, Mrs. Peacock talks about the pride, the love, when you know your boy will do anything for his mother. The ideology of their nostalgic hegemony values sustaining and protecting their family over obeying the law. After this unsuccessful conversation, Mulder and Scully must physically confront the Peacock sons, which ends in the death of one of them and the escape of the rest of the family. Mulder and Scully's inability to stop the Peacocks symbolizes their inability to change their hegemony. It survives in the face of scientific reason, biological instability, and logical reasoning. The most shocking and terrifying element of this episode is not the murder, incest, and infanticide committed by the Peacock family, but the realization that this hegemony was unable to be altered or defeated. It plays into a fear that a society striving toward progress and improvement has. While attempting to move forward, there are beliefs steeped in an incorrect or incomplete view of the past that also refuses to move into the present or even consider alternate hegemonies. This is something we see today. Just one example being the recent debates and struggle over the continued use of the Confederate flag. The longer that a nostalgic hegemony is practiced, the more difficult it is to break down. While we are often warned against believing what we are told by the government and media, this episode plays into our fears of the exact opposite. A complete refusal to see the past as it really was, and to hold so tightly onto the ideological and practiced way of our nostalgic view of it can be a destructive and ultimately unsustainable practice that is impossible to break down, stop, or change.